on the Culture Changemakers course with me this morning. I'm impressed that you've got the tolerance for my voice after an hour and a half together. I'm delighted to see you. You'll be glad to know that I have actually got Wi-Fi, but I'm still in the room where the light turns off. So if you see any of your fellow participants panic, let them know that I am still here. The ghostly figure's me as we work our way through. But welcome along to the session today, everyone. It's so great to have you. I'm Paula Brockwell. I'm the founder of the Employee Experience Project, and also just the, just mute yourself as you work your way through. That'd be amazing.
Why am I getting no sound?
Have you got you?
We can hear, I think I know that voice. We can hear you, Jenny. I'm muting you. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Paula Brockwell. I'm the founder of the Employee Experience Project, and Spark is my absolute passion project because I totally believe that we need to be doing culture change better and differently. And so Spark is a community that's really born out of my passion to really help people get information and insights and new ideas in terms of how they drive culture change, because I find in my own work that a lot of the time when I'm working with organizations that actually people are just knackered because they're trying to make the change happen themselves, and they're really struggling with activating the masses to make things happen. So when Liz joined the community many months ago, you were one of the early joiners, I think one of the OGs, and she and I just talked about her approach to comms. I just thought this is somebody who the community really need to hear from. And then she wrote this amazing book, which is genuinely one of the best books that I have ever read, both in terms of clarity and accessibility of insight, but just the nuances that she pulls out in terms of how to really make things successful, that I just thought we cannot not have a conversation with her about what makes great comms. So that's what today's session is about. I'm going to let Liz introduce herself properly, but basically she's my favourite author and comms person that there's ever been, and even more favourite because she's so willing to share her time and expertise and insights with us as we work through the session. So what we're going to suggest, this is an in-conversation session. We'd love to be hearing from you in the chat and what your questions are. I'll kind of curate those and try and prioritise those over the ridiculous list of questions that I've got to ask her myself. We'll kind of take her insights. But what we're going to do before we get into the question section is I just thought it'd be really nice for us to ask Liz just to share a bit of her view around how comms can really support culture change. So I'm going to hand over to her for a few minutes to introduce herself and share that, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Goodness, that was such a lovely introduction, and your tenor is definitely in the post, winging its way to you as we speak. So morning sparklers, that's what I'm going to call you, because we're all here because we want to do culture change better, and I think Paula has got the forum to do it here. So before I start, a little bit about me. I am a self-professed refresher of communication. I think communication has got a little bit pale and stale, and I wasn't happy with that. And combined with lots and lots of experience and lots of ideas, I put together the book. And having met Paula before, I know we're completely on the same wavelength. So I'm really looking forward to sort of letting you into my head this morning. So first of all, just a couple of thoughts from me on this slide. The first point that I want to make is that culture change is so bloody hard, and everybody has their own thoughts on why. I think it takes courage and determination to change culture. It involves battles and tensions of all different levels of the organisation, but somewhere in all that mess and noise is the truth. The reason why change is needed, the rationale, the why of this is the better way. And let's face it, we can't keep still. So change is always going to be part and parcel of everyday life at work. So that truth actually emerges from hard business facts. There's no getting away from them. So we can't forget the commercial side of business, but also, most importantly, it has to appeal. We have to take that truth and we have to make that appeal to the humanness in all of us. So that's really my first point. My second point is that I think in most organisations, the basics are being forgotten. Common sense is sort of stifled because organisations are clinging desperately and blindly to their processes and systems and hierarchies. And complex is seen as smarter than being simple. So I think all of that together works against everything that you're trying to do. You're just trying to cut through everything and get everybody working and performing as best they can and bringing them the best selves to work while satisfying all of those commercial goals as well, those organisational goals and objectives. And the other last point really is change, rather than being seen as something that is natural and evolving and an ongoing state of play. It's given a title and it's put on an agenda. And it's this standalone, separate thing. And if it's not managed well, if it's not communicated well, especially from a people perspective, it's going to be as welcome as a fart in a lift, as Jadrinda would say. So this is the context of from where I'm talking to you. And I think that's quite important to start with. So slide 2, please, Paula. Thank you. So the first thing to say is that healthy, successful, sustainable culture change is very similar to great internal communication. They've got a lot in common. They both involve what's on the slide there, connecting people, purpose and strategy. That requires a shift in thinking, particularly for leadership. That could be another sort of webinar talking a lot about leadership, but let's stick with this first. So what we need to do is reframe the workplace and align commercial success with people and culture success, because they are inextricably linked. And getting the connections right means that what we need to do is leverage all the golden opportunities that are held and on offer from all of these three things: the people, the purpose and the strategy, because there's an awful lot to tap into there. In terms of people, we know that they bring more skills, more to work than skills and knowledge. You're tapping into talent, creativity, relationships and stories. Those are the really rich things that you can bring in to help support and drive culture change. Those things are needed, and it's exactly the same in communication. The purpose is always going to bring the emotional connection that people need, and it's very much a key motivator in terms of culture change. So that's extremely important. It sort of makes all of the effort meaningful and worth it, because without that, why would people bother? And of course, then strategy is going to, hopefully, it should join all of the dots for people so that it makes sense, so that people can resonate and relate to what's happening. So those are the three key things really that are going to help you make that connection, whether you are in HR trying to drive culture change, or whether you're supporting that through communication. Those are those three things. So the next slide is about how HR and comms can partner better. And I think the first thing to do, can I have that? Yeah, thank you. The first thing to do is realise it's a match in heaven. If they were on Tinder, this is what it might read like. So problem solver, HR, seeks problem preventer, comms, for a long-term relationship, and of course a good sense of humour would always be desirable and always definitely needed. So both HR and comms do the same job but in different ways. So they're there to support the business to achieve its goals. So that's your strategy and your operations, your profit. but it's also there to make it as good an experience as possible for the people involved. And that involves meeting people's basic needs as a minimum, but then some, you know, making more of that. And that's what HR I would say, want to spend their time doing, is enhancing the workplace, not just firefighting all the time. And HR, you'll find yourself firefighting an awful lot. I mean, literally, that's probably 90% of the work that you do. There's lots of practitioners that I'm aware of who are burning out and leaving HR because it's just too big a job and they haven't got the right tools and backing to implement what they want to implement, the things that they know are going to make a difference. And that's just awful. It's a complete travesty. We need your skills and empathy and experience more than ever in the workshop. Comms, on the other hand, are in the business of preventing problems, or it should be. Any internal communication should not be causing misunderstandings and issues between people, between departments. It should be showing that everyone's joined with a common bond, and showing how to use that in order to move forward. So I think they're quite a good match. I think when HR are doing less firefighting, like I say, they can concentrate more on the incredible work that they want to do, and the stuff that's really going to help people advance and grow the business. So they have to work together. But that actually assumes that comms is always good, and it isn't. Communication isn't always good. There's a lot of crap that is distributed around organisations, not because people want to do that, but because that's how it's just happening at the moment, because it's being done on the fly without any proper guidance and framework. So comms has to bring quite a few things to the table itself. So could I have slide 4, please? Thank you. So to drive change, communication needs a number of things. It has to start with a framework. The framework is going to be the North Star guide, as I call it, the thing that everyone refers to and helps them make decisions around how you're going to put messages out, what the content is going to be, how it relates to people, and what you want the outcome of the message to be, because there has to be a point. It has to understand the audience perspective and not just come from the leadership or the business perspective. The receiver of the information is more important than the sender. The sender already knows it, or should, because they're sending it. So remember that the audience isn't necessarily coming from a level of understanding that you are. You might like to assume that people know, but they don't quite often. Intentional, you have to have intentional communication. And in that respect, I think what I'm saying is it can't be lazy. If there isn't anything to share, don't share. If something is, you have to know, you need to know, then that's the intention behind that message. Sometimes messages are just, here's a nice to know. And I think the combination of the two helps give that variety that people really crave from communication. I touched on this before. We've got to banish assumptions. You cannot assume that people understand the context. You may be coming from a strategy meeting where everything's been agreed and you have the job of translating that and giving people the information. They're waiting, what's happening, what decisions have been made. Remember to go back to the whole context, the basic context of what's happening, because people will need reminding time and time again. Maybe they won't be as focused on change as you will be as a HR person or a comms person, but they've still got to make a lot of sense to them. So don't don't come from a lazy perspective and just start talking from where you left off with somebody else. Take it back. It has to have a relatable meaning. So why? Make sure that people understand the why behind the change, or the why behind the request, or the why that you're giving them the information. Because without meaning, it's just that, it's just information, and people won't know what to do with it. The emotion trumps logic bit. I could go into this for quite some time and I won't, but I have to flag that up because we all like to think we're very grown up as adults in the workplace, and that we behave and make decisions based on logic, and we don't. Emotion is always in play. The first time we read an email, we're looking for meaning, especially if it's a long, boring one. We're trying to find, what does that mean to us? When we hear about change, I mean, change does weird things to people. It can really change, you know, turn somebody from a really positive person into a really negative version of themselves. So again, emotion is like, oh my God, what does this mean for me? Is this good? Is this bad? And that's quite a basic human instinct. And if you've studied psychology at any level, you'll understand why this is such an important point to make. This is what makes people tick. And this is what you need to understand and leverage that insight in your communications, in your dealings with people, is that yes, it would be great if we all went around logically like robots, but we don't. So there's a lot of emotional needs that need to be appreciated and met in your communications. And of course, the final one is it has to be two-way. It can't be a one-way street. Communication is about connection, not information churn. So every message, there has to be some relatability and connection with the audience. So giving feedback loops is a great way to do that, because it gets people invested in change, involved in change. So they are proactive, not passive. That's the kind of, you want them to be playing an active role, because when things go tits up, when things, excuse my language, which they invariably will in any change initiative, because it's a long road and it's lumps and bumps, because they're already part of that discussion, part of that dialogue and conversation and activity, they'll be more forgiving when you have to course correct, because they've taken part ownership of it. So don't forget the immense value of the two-way. And of course, there's leadership philosophy weaved all the way through this. And this isn't, I'm not talking to you about leadership, but inextricably linked to leadership is good communication. And it has to allow for feedback and involvement, because that's how you empower employees. And, you know, we talk about the employee voice. That's where the employee voice is going to come from as well. So just the final slide now, which which in a nutshell, for me, is a statement made in a report. There's lots of reports about, isn't there? But all they do really is tell us what we already know. But I like this because it really epitomises what Refreshing Comms is all about, and I'll read it. People want authenticity. Why do we keep serving them sanitised content? They want genuine and transparent experiences, something that makes them feel good about their place of work. Communications lack personality and emotion. It's time to be braver. And, you know, we started by talking about the courage and determination it takes to try and implement culture change. Well, this is the same. Communications have to be braver as well, because we have to find a new way of getting people's attention. So that's kind of a little tiny peek into my head. and hopefully it'll sort of provide a bit of a foundation for some good conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. That's amazing. I really appreciate you kind of talk to us about it. And I would recommend, if you want to delve into this a bit more, Liz's book, honestly, one of the best reads I've ever read. It was in the top 3 categories as an Amazon bestseller, including HR and business books within the first week that it was released. So, you know, Simon's got it already. Have you read any of it yet, Simon?
Thanks, Simon.
It's good. It's worth the read, I would absolutely say. So there's loads of stuff in there. Totally up for taking any questions in the chat as we go, but I'm going to indulge myself first. So please feel free, if anything is occurring to you as we're chatting, to pop it in there. The first thing I think for me to talk about is probably just ordering stuff in the change process. It's one of the things that you talked about early in that overview that you've just given, Liz, which is this bit around creating a strategic narrative that counts. So I hear loads from you there around that, just that quote that you've used around that authenticity, the emotion piece, but also making it make sense in the day to day. Talk to me about kind of what you see as the critical bits that people need to build into that story to make sure that that change makes sense to people and they're willing to come on the journey with you.
Yeah, sure. So what I'd say from the get-go is that change should be happening for a reason. So you've already got a story. Change isn't happening in isolation from anything else. So if you use the reason for change as your starter, because people can understand a story unfolding, people can understand, I see, but that reason, it can't just be because it's good for the business. You have to then bring in that, yes, it's good for the business because of this, but then go into, but look at the rich experience we're going to get by going through this together, and draw out all of those opportunities for people to grow themselves. Now, that might sound a little bit fluffy, but the emotional side of change is much bigger than the factual side, the practical side. People, it's not that people don't like change, but if it's not their idea, it's scary. And then they haven't had that luxury of sitting down and thinking of all the different scenarios and options. They haven't been part of that decision-making process. So you have to lead them through that in a logical way, not in an overly detailed way, because that would take forever and just start confusing people, but pick those key things that are going to meet their needs of, certainty is a massive need, fairness is a massive need, but you can't always offer people certainty. So people will want the truth. They would rather know that there's some difficult things ahead than be protected and kept in the dark. I think anyone as a human being, we'd all, concur with that. So make sure that you're covering that you acknowledge the discomfort. This is very important because it means that you are then leading change in collaboration rather than through instruction.
Yeah.
And the change process is one of co-creation. It can't happen just by telling people this is what's going to happen and you'll go along with it. So, and leaders need to understand this big time. I think when you work in HR, you've got your ear to the ground, your finger on the pulse a lot more. So this is something that is hard to make go up the chain, but you have to try. You really, really have to go at it. And armed with the facts and armed with a narrative that is inclusive of everybody, that has the meaning, that has purpose, that is relatable, and also making it, the content, engaging, and putting personality into it. all of these things are going to make something worthwhile reading, worthwhile remembering, and worthwhile acting on. So that's where my start point would be.
Yeah, and I suppose what you're saying kind of just it nudges for me something I hear myself saying a lot to clients and in our courses and things, which is we're talking about base concepts here, but we're not talking about a single point in time. So, I think you talked before about how do we make this make sense in real life? So being honest about the why and what the business benefits are, that catches people's attention, especially senior people, but it doesn't keep their attention. It's that authenticity and emotion and honesty that it feels congruent that keeps people kind of coming with you, doesn't it? So I think it's really interesting to think about that bit around points in time and what type of information do we use with certain groups at certain times and how does that evolve? Because I love the fact that you talk about that openly piece around talking about pain points, because just because we're not mentioning that our shoes hurt doesn't mean we haven't got a blister and we don't know we've got a blister. You can't hide from the pain, can you? Everybody can feel it.
No.
So you're much better to call it out and explain why that pain's there and why it's going to be worth it in the long term.
Yeah.
I'm not sure an uncomfortable pair of shoes are ever worth it, but other pain I'm sure is. They tell me that when I'm at the gym anyway.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think with pain as well, think of it. There's a bit in the book that talks about gain from pain. And it's not about exercising and eating healthy foods. It's actually about the fact that pain can be a good thing, because if there's no pain, there's no solution. And one of the ways to really involve people on the change journey is to show them how you're moving towards the solution of that pain. And those pains can be really big and massive and take years to put right. And others can be far more immediate. So find what the pains are, ask what the pains are, find them. They can be the most stupid little things that annoy people every day. But as a means of getting people into the mindset of change, if you tackle some of the easier things that probably you think, well, that's not really going to make much difference, but it does make a tangible difference for people because you've said, there's a pain, right? How are we going to tackle that? Here's what we're going to do. And then tell them it's been improved, tell them the change has happened, or get better still, involve them in that little bit of change. I mean, there's an example in the book about the bloody photocopier. It's always jamming. Whose fault is that? Is that the person's fault? Is that the office manager? Is it HR's fault? I mean, the fault can lie anywhere. But just simple things that make a day a little bit smoother and highlight them, and then move on to another one.
Yeah. And I suppose that kind of catches for me again. My brain's just sparking all over the place as you're talking, but it makes me think of one of the things that you write about in the book, which is really flagging that idea of your colleague as your customer, and how in the same ways you've got to deliver on your brand promise to your customers, you've got to do the same with colleagues, and aligning your messages and what you're promising with what you're actually going to be able to deliver and evolving that over time is something that really came out. I'd be interested to just hear your thoughts around how you if people are in a business perhaps where colleagues are seen like cogs in the machine rather than customers that you've got to engage and foster an experience with to allow the right behavior and right business results to come out. How do you start that transition? What does that look like for you in terms of helping them reorientate towards that view?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I think a lot of it comes down to individual people. If you look at change and it making sense, it needs to make sense on an individual level, a team level, and an organizational level. And sometimes you can't. Where am I going with this? I think the people who are involved in the change process have to have bought into that change themselves. Yeah, they have to have done that. You can't sell something that you don't believe in. You're not going to do that very well. Can you just backtrack to that question? Because my mind was sparking there and I was going to go in one direction or another.
Well, yeah, for me, it's about that bit around colleague as customer. How do you start to make
Yes.
that transition? Because I suppose, why am I asking the question? Because I think some businesses fear, don't they, that you will get into an indulgent space and just be doing everything that colleagues want and business needs won't be met. So that idea of colleague customer, I think, is really helpful in terms of engaging customers, but it could create some fear in some businesses where leaders are thinking we're all just turning into the snowflakes that everybody thinks we are these days.
In the beginning, what I was talking about was a framework, and that the framework will hold all of those key things that you're talking about. It will hold all of the hard business facts, but it will also hold all of the emotional and psychological needs that you want to be addressing in your comms. So in terms of leadership, it's a difficult one because I often wonder, so CEOs are looking for great HR people, but I think also HR people are looking for great CEOs more and more. And it can be a bit of a dance, but when you use a framework, what you're doing is communicating and acting on something that's already being agreed, which are your strategic drivers for the organisation. So these have been set by the leaders, yeah? So you've got your strategy, your operational strategy, your people strategy, your commercial strategy, whatever it might be. What you're doing is you're tapping into all of those and bringing out the key strategic drivers, and they're going to inform your communication. So the answers are already there, and the leadership have already put, had their hand in terms of the framework. So even if they're not actively involved in the communication, all you're doing is you're translating the strategy for people and making it meaningful and relatable. Yeah. So I think really that the North Star Guide, that can't be argued with. And when it comes to valuing internal communication, the higher up the hierarchy you go, the more they want to see a return on investment. So when you're on the ground level, you know how important the human stuff is. When you're talking up and you're at, the C-suite level, they want to see, right, if you're doing this with communication, if you're doing this as a HR department, then what am I seeing? Where's the difference? What am I seeing? And I think that's what you were saying, Paula, that it's there's a big gap, isn't there? There's a big gap. And it does come down to being brave, and it does come down to sticking to your guns. And if you have put that framework together correctly, and there's a really great framework in the book that brings everything together that you'll need. You won't need anything else. All you'll need is that. Then that is your reason, that is your Bible in terms of what you are doing and what you are communicating. And it means that messages will not get confused. If leadership are so concerned about the value of what you're doing, think about it like this. In a board meeting, or a management meeting, senior management meeting, communication is hardly ever on the agenda. It's probably not even there as an agenda item, but by default, it's getting talked about all the time, because what gets talked about around that table are people issues, operational issues, and other day-to-day problems. So inadvertently, what you're doing with communication is actually in the boardroom itself. So you're already having an influence in terms of them recognising the benefits. Sorry.
That's all right. Makes
Let me
sense.
just take a glass of water.
Becky's just asked the question, how do you begin to really push change is going to happen with an essence that it's for the better and that people can be part of it. So she's just set that context of, you often hear that things will never change. And I think this is an interesting one, isn't it? It comes back to what you talked about there in terms of that shared framework of what's the intent, so that you've got some authenticity around it. But this is probably a question that I get asked a lot in my work, both in terms of how do we get exec to kind of be comfortable with that employee-centric side of things, that it's not going to get overplayed and become a indulgent cozy club, but also how do we convince colleagues that this isn't just words on a wall or another thing that we're saying we're going to do, but if they ignore it, it works through. And I think your framework helps create that sense of, let's be absolutely clear about what we're doing here, what we're contracting on, to allow you as a comms or an HR person to really shift into that business partnering mode where you're not just saying the things that exec want you to or writing the messages, but really supporting and challenging them or the wider business around what messages need to go out and why. But I suppose the other piece for me is on that question is probably about aligning behavior. So I think your side of aligning where the HR partnership and the comms partnership is beautiful to answer this question is probably comms talking authentically and honestly about what's needed, why, and how it's needed, and the journey. But then really that the HR side of things, really business partnering with the exec, with the leaders, to make sure that the behaviours, the systems, the processes are really authentically showing how things move forward, really. So I think there's an interesting marriage there to make those things come together, that's about matching voice with behaviour, which is often quite fragmented. I don't know if that's your experience or not. What's thought about those alignments?
Yeah, definitely. I think that some of the best change initiatives that I've seen have involved exactly that, because communicating is already one part of it. So some of the best ones I've ever seen, that they're the ones that sort of join hearts and minds and create the right conditions for habit shifts, changing habits, because you can't transform an organization you know, a more in a big way, in a sweeping way. So sort of using communication function as a means of bridging that gap. So right, I'm really sorry. I'm going to be really honest.
Yeah,
This is a menopause moment. I'm really sorry. So so let me go back. Let me go back. I'm sorry, Paula, you're going to have to just ask
You're all
me
right.
the question.
So just talking about that piece around how you ensure that authenticity between how people are behaving and how the comms are coming through, what was your tips about making sure that those messages are nice and clear, and you know, and that you're helping the business be consistent in its comms? What's important around that, do you think?
There are a number of hallmarks really that make sure that a messaging hits the right tone. So clarity and consistency, obviously. I think the problem is that if you are sending out without that framework, your messaging, you might be saying one thing one way and the leaders might be saying something else, and you get a disconnect. And it's very confusing for people, and it gives people the opportunity to just take whatever is being said or suggested or planned with a pinch of salt. So I think definitely using your framework to do that. I think authenticity, you have to be authentic, and if you're looking at the vision of the organisation, the values of the organisation, then that helps to create the framework for everything that happens inside.
Yeah.
So as long as you're sticking to that and you're communicating the values and you're encouraging those behaviours, and again, the change will be happening for a reason. So the change will be very much threaded all the way through those new behaviours.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking nonsense. Oh
You're not
gosh, I'm
talking
so
nonsense.
embarrassed.
You really don't need to be embarrassed at all.
Oh,
You're
this
really valuable.
this hasn't happened to me for a long time.
Sure, plenty of us have got the many or many moments on us, so I
Oh
wouldn't
my
worry at all.
goodness. Yes, yes, yeah.
Kate, feel free. I see you've got a question. Do you want to
Please
come in?
ask questions, someone.
Hi, Liz. Well, high five first for the menopause reference. I thought it was
Oh,
just
thanks.
Absolutely.
I do normally know what I'm talking about, but my
You do
brain's
know.
just going.
We all do. We all do, right?
Oh,
We all
bless
get it.
you. Bless
So-
you. Thank you.
I just want to ask something slightly different, actually, and kind of go, as a leader, I get constantly told you can't communicate enough. Just communicate, communicate, communicate. And some of the feedback I get from my team, so I lead a change team, so they are in the thick of it and they understand the importance of it. But some of the feedback I get from my team is there is so much communication. I can't work out what's important and what it's not. And now, with an ever increasing amount of channels to receive it via, it's coming in through all angles and keeping on top of everything that's going on Teams, on email, on everything else that the organisation puts out centrally, is becoming quite overwhelming. So, any tips, I guess, for how we make it easier for our people to digest and absorb the right things?
Yeah. Well, going back to those elements of good communication, intention. There has to be an intention around messages. So think about the content and the tone. Those are the two things that people are going to notice. Whether it comes to them via email, Slack, newsletter, whatever, there are so many different channels, but they're distracting people because the channels aren't the answer. It's the content. It's what you're saying and how you say it that is actually going to affect people in a positive or a negative way. So, yes, there is room for more automated platforms and apps and all of these shiny new things. But if what you're saying is rubbish, it really doesn't matter if people get it, from various different channels at all. So I'd say that focus on the content, and the content has to be consistent with what's being said before. It has to be aligned with what other departments are saying. This is why it's so important to have a central communication function, because communication sort of flits around like a butterfly, and it's, oh, I'm going to say this and I'll say that and I'll send this email out. And it's like, not only is the volume, but there's also such a mix of messages. And in the end, people go, you know what? I haven't got time for this. I haven't got the headspace to care. I'm just going to go head down and I'm going to get on with my job. And then I'm going to get in the car and go home for tea. And that's, how can you get the best out of people when that happens? So, and it smacks of not respecting people's time. If you were just throwing things out willy-nilly and mixing messages, it means, well, we really don't care about you. As long as we've ticked the box and we've sent that information out, it's up to you what you do with it. It's fine. It's up to you what you do with it. So this is where, again, where the relatability and the purpose and meaning is so important.
Good, thank you. It's really strange because actually you get to a place now where the platforms enable just anybody to communicate anything, and there's an encouragement to do that, to be open and it not be so formal, but there kind of needs to be some guidelines around it as well, because it's a bit lawless at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it comes down to making decisions of possibly, I think that one of the best things to do at first is to reduce the amount of channels. Now, it might sound a bit whoa to people, just reduce them, because then there's less tabs open. There's because there's always somebody who will overuse a Slack channel. We know who they are. They're always on it. And you know what they've had for lunch. where they're going at the weekend, and it's just so distracting. So I think having less is more, and making sure that within any messaging that you are distilling the main things, but there has to be a bit of personality in there. In fact, a lot. I always say to people, use your personality in abundance, not sparingly, when you communicate, because the more human you are, the greater, the more connections, the more appealing you are, the more relatable you are. And I think that's a lot of what the book talks about, in terms of just loosen up a bit. Stop taking everything so seriously. Yes, business is a serious business, but nobody wants to be bored to death, and you can engage people in a different way. Even menopausal women, you can.
We can do
grab
anything.
them. You can grab their attention and bring them straight back in the room. Thank you so much. But yes, so I think let's not get distracted. What I said in the beginning, back to basics. But what do people need to know in order to be part of this change journey?
Good.
What do they need to know? Yeah.
Really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The question that's burning for me, how do you figure out what people need to know versus what you want to tell them? What is it? What's the secret to communicating what people need to hear rather than what you want to tell them?
Yeah, because I mean, how do you create one message that will resonate with everyone when the organization is full of different characters and people and personality, different levels of engagement? So how do you do that? I say that you get right down to the root, which is we're all human, and if you understand what makes people tick and communicate, use that in your communications, then you'll hit 90% of people. And write for one person. If you're struggling to write a message, think of one person and write it as if you're writing to them.
Nice.
Because what one person wants, really, generally speaking, is what we all want: to feel valued, respected, informed, not kept in the dark, being involved, and having the opportunity to feedback, to take part in something, and ask questions as well, because change just makes people go blah, and people have lots and lots of questions. So that would be another big thing.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. So I've seen one other question that I just want to catch before we let people escape back to their day. Joe asks, what would you say are the key markers for success or failure in comms?
I would say that the key factors for success are that people are responding to you. So the key, if you are being engaging, if you are being meaningful, and I know I use these words a lot, but they're so important. Good communication will make somebody understand what their role is and where they fit in the bigger picture. And it'll also go beyond that, but as a minimum, that has to happen. I think really bad communication, when communication fails, it's because it's been over complex, it's been inconsistent, and it doesn't have a point. And it also doesn't have what I'd call a call to action, which is, what do you want people to do with that information? It might be that you want them to go do something, or feedback, or make a decision on something. It can't just be, here's some information, there you go, deal with it. So that there has to be that loop. So I think those things are really, really essential to remember. And remember that you're talking to human beings, not departments. So bring a little bit of humanness into it and personality. Those things go a long, long way with people, really long way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love that bit that you flag around that engaging. It's like you're just really underlining the fact that what you're not trying to do is tell people, you're trying to start a conversation, aren't you? So if people are engaging with you, you know that you've started a conversation. And even if they're saying stuff that you don't like to hear, at least they're telling you it and you can respond to it, can't you? So
Well,
I
yeah.
love that as a reflection.
Yeah, absolutely, because then it allows you to be honest in return. I mean, not being rude or anything, but you know, if you create that, there's only honesty that builds trust. And if you want people to, what you're saying about change is that change is something in the future. So you're asking people to believe in something that isn't there yet.
Yeah.
So you've got to take them through step by step by step and let them be involved. Sorry, I'm looking at the time. I realise we're over. That's because of my menopause Mabel, I call her. She popped up. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. That's great. Well, that was the last question we wanted to ask. So thank you so much for your time. We welcome menopause, safe place for menopause Mabel. She's welcome wherever she wants, quite frankly.
Oh my goodness.
She sits here with me too, so it's a reality for a good
thank you
chunk
for
of us.
bearing with me. That was excruciating at times. Thank you for bearing with me.
You did
Bless you.
fantastically. So just kind of for anybody who wants to know, we'll be sending out, for anyone who hasn't got it, sorry, Simon, I know you said you've already got yours. We'll send out a recording of the session, but also a discount code for Liz's book that is valid for a week. Is that right, Liz? I'm trying to remember what you said.
Yeah, it is. It is. I've kept it open for a week. So so get your orders in and enjoy the read.
Yeah, I think it's honestly one of the most just accessible, but you know, beautifully written, accessible, practical tools based book, but with some real subtleties around actually making this work in a complex world. So I hope you find it useful. Our next Spark session, so you know, is on the the 2nd of July, nearly, on really engaging your exec in the change and making them part of your tribe as you're driving that forward. So we'll be sending information out on that soon. But before that, just want to say thank you, Liz, so much for your time. And thank you, everybody, for getting involved. We'll send information out. And yeah, we'd love to stay in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Lovely. Thank you.